Hello humans, Master Flex here, bringing you the low quality content you deserve, and today I'll be going over the gradual improvement we have started seeing with legacy support. Now it's honestly started, like 2 to 3 years ago, but it's still very noticeable, because one of the things is, legacy support has two different approaches it has, where it's an entire wave, and they usually use that as part of sets or entire themes of set, or it's a random card here and there. And for the reason it's more noticeable now is because of the card here and there version. Those have been getting a lot better to the point where they're always basically good for the deck they're made for. Because back then, and for the longest time, that's not how it worked. When we would get like 1 or 2 cards for an archetype as legacy support, it would basically fall into 4 categories. It would fall into Traptrix Dionea, which, by the way, dates how long I've been playing this game, that I actually remember Dionea as legacy support. Where it's actually good for the deck and plays with it responsibly. Just good legacy support. And then the second one is this example, where it's a card that basically it respects what the deck is trying to do, but man, it's not good for it. It's actually so mediocre that you have a better deck list without it being there. And then 3, we had legacy support that was entirely tone deaf to how the deck actually played. This is a perfect example, Artifact Vagina. It was just... If you only read the artifact monsters, this would not be an issue, but that's the problem. The only way this card ever makes sense for any reason ever is if you have an entire back row of monsters, but that's not how the deck played. Even if you're playing a pure artifact deck, that was not how the deck played, so it was just incredibly tone deaf. Or the final one, which happened rarely, but it actually happened, is it would be support for a completely different deck, but just used an archetype's name. Ancient Gearbox, for those who don't know, this was not made for Ancient Gears. This was made specifically for Yugioh back in 2014, where Geargant X could search this, and it allowed them to search a Yugioh monster on top. So basically, a Geargant search was a +2 instead of a +1. Incredibly just not fun, not interesting. A lot of legacy support that only ever reminded you that archetypes existed, never actually contributing to those archetypes in any meaningful way. But we haven't seen that in a while. What we're actually seeing is basically Dioneas, or in the case of others, we're seeing the ones down here. So, with the gradual improvement of legacy support that I've seen, it's actually contributing to those decks. Now, here's something I'm going to say right now that you don't have to entirely agree with, but basically, most of the bad archetypes in this game are bad because, like, 1 or 2 cards don't exist for them. They're not bad. Not many of them are bad because they're just inherently flawed. It's just they're missing a very specific type of effect that, because it doesn't happen, they don't have a proper game plan. You probably see it with really old archetypes where they're not updated, and you can see that because they have like 0 methods of disruption, and because of that they can't actually play very well into the modern game. You probably see that all the time, but that's actually just the case for basically all the decks. It's just they're either dated or they're missing a very specific card. And I will just say this right now. Konami, for the most part, knows what they're doing when they're designing cards. The truth is, there's a pretty good chance that when they're designing these decks that are pretty mediocre, but they're missing 1 card that, because of that, they're mediocre, that's probably intentional. They're basically, when they make a deck they're not too sure on, they'll see the popularity, and if it's a really big fan favorite, they'll start giving the cards they know it needs to succeed. But that's just kind of something I wanted to say there, and you can actually see this take perfect example, and I think one is the Weather Field Spell. This card actually addressed a very glaring issue that it had a boss monster that was basically inaccessible by its own playstyle. I mean, it's actually very funny that it was, but because of that, it just it didn't really work the way it was intended. So you had this boss monster that was virtually inaccessible through its own game plan, and even if you got into it, it was such a resource sink, so the weather forecast went ahead and just gave it an effect that allowed it to play this kind of playstyle properly. Now, regardless of its meta viability, that's not what I mean when I say good legacy support. Because here's the secret about the game of Yugioh. Konami doesn't care that much about meta games and, like, top tier and whatnot. The OCG is designed specifically around viability of anything playable. Basically, the OCG has gotten a lot better at respecting Yugioh is a pet decking game, and the TCG is also starting to catch on as well. Yugioh is a pet decking game. You have the vast majority of the player base likes one or two decks that they really enjoy, and then everything else is kind of whatever to them. They won't really switch decks because they don't enjoy most other playstyles. And the casual community in any game ever, not just Yugioh, any game ever, the casual community outnumbers the competitive community by so many metrics that when you see things pretty much made for, like, legacy casual fun support, they're actually pandering to the right crowd. Them making a meta deck once every set is not them pandering to the right crowd. That's something I guess Yu-Gi-Oh players need to understand. If you are a competitive player, you are so incredibly outnumbered by casual players that you just have to respect. Sometimes we'll just have slow formats where they just want to test casual support around. And, I mean, that's fine. Just, if you're going to do that, you probably need to have more effective ban lists during that time period so the meta itself doesn't get too stale. But, because of that, legacy support doesn't need to be meta. It just needs to be passably rogue and playable and functional. Because if you do that, you actually allow these, like, deck communities to see some level of success, whether it's regional tops or maybe even the occasional YCS top, to the dedicated player. That's what they want. I honestly think that's what they want, because it's basically, like, living in the anime almost. Because it actually... there's basically every deck can function on a level, and a player who puts in a lot of effort can get a lot out of it. And I think that's the way they are approaching legacy support now, and I actually think it's for the better, because these three cards like these have no reason to ever exist. They have no reason to ever waste ink on them. That's just the truth. They are not good. They are not good for the game. They're not good for even wasting anyone's time. And we've actually seen this play out in many different ways. I actually like all of them except one very specific example. We can see this with the weather. They get fully functional just off of really one card, and that's really nice. But even with Marincess, they got a whole wave of support, no pun intended, and it actually helped them out a lot, because one of the biggest problems is that the deck legitimately was just Trickstars, and Trickstars is a deck that literally doesn't function anymore. It literally was entirely dependent on generic cards and drawing like a hand trap and calling it a day. That's not passable. That is not passable anymore. But with the new wave, they actually gave it support, and for dedicated players, they can get pretty far with it. And a perfect example of how hard this can go is Meow Meow Mew, because Prank Kids as a deck had a huge flaw, where it was a snowball deck where you just mass generated monsters, but the problem is you couldn't even get your engine going until you drew a 3 of hand. You had to draw 2 Prank Kids at least and a way to fusion summon. And that was such a massive resource sink that basically it wasn't even realistically doable. So they made Meow Meow Mew. Now, to be fair, this was overtuned, but it's kind of an example of what I'm talking about. They directly saw the problem with the deck, or artificially created the problem with my tinfoil hat, and then addressed it. And I think this is actually just a really cool way to approach legacy support. Now, not to say they can't do it wrong anymore, because we have 2 examples that are pretty recent of them not doing it properly. For one is Gladiator Beast. Now, Gladiator Beast, for those who don't know, because you have to be a very old Yu-Gi-Oh player to know this, Gladiator Beast have such an insane legacy on the game. I don't know if they still have it, but for the longest time, and they might still be it, they are the most YCS winning deck of all time. Which is really saying something when you compare it to modern power levels. So it has like a really, really iconic legacy. And what they did in 2019 was effectively make it a mediocre combo deck. They stripped the entire playstyle away from it to be like a really crappy spam deck that wasn't even good at what it did. So you erased what made it interesting to follow the trends of 2019 where everyone was saying, make a new combo deck, make a new combo deck. So you erased its identity while at the same time not making a good combo deck. This is something they want to avoid. Don't try to overwrite its original playstyle just for nothing reasons. Like, that's a bad thing. And another bad thing is sometimes they make legacy support that just doesn't support its deck at all. Instead, it just viciously supports something else. To be fair, Souls is good in Dark Magician, like, yeah. But you didn't really make sure it wasn't good in anything else. So you get a situation like Souls, where it's actually just a broken card in any deck you find it in, which is not exactly what you want. But to be fair, like, most of the legacy support has been on point, whether it be a full wave of it, or even a card here and there. They're getting a lot better at understanding the legacy support that really helps the deck. And I like that a lot. I'm glad they're doing it, and I'm just more excited to see more. But I actually have two examples of how easy it is to implement legacy support to decks you think are just unplayable. Because the truth is, like I said, most decks are only bad because they're like missing a card or two. Everything else allows them to function. Now there are exceptions where a deck is so thoroughly far behind, you would have to, like, give it multiple waves of support to actually modernize it. But these examples, I think you'll enjoy a lot. Now, for this first demonstration, it's actually a little cheaty because I added 2 new cards to the archetype. But even if you just added 1, the point would come across. It's actually just kind of that simple. And what's really funny is it's just a 1-card combo. Now let's think about what Bujins are. They are an archetype about quite literally protecting the castle, where you have a beast warrior on field that is the warrior, and they have support animals, whether they be the graveyard and field ones that are land animals, or the avian animals that give it effects while they're in the hand. Like, Crane is an honest for them, and Turtle is a graveyard protection for them. So it's like a warrior using spirit animals to fight back. So let's actually make support that does that, because when we think about protecting the castle, back in 2013, 2014, that really meant battle, but we're so infinitely beyond that. So let's think about some logical support that this deck can get, but I'll just show you this 1-card combo. We'll tribute the Rescue Rabbit. I'm not even going to try to pronounce its name. And we are going to summon Pegasus. And for this example, here is one idea of a card you can give them. Bujinki doesn't matter, just land animal. If you control a Beast Warrior Bujin monster, you can banish this card from your graveyard. Target one spell or trap your opponent controls, negating its effects until the end of the turn, and it's a quick effect if you control a Bujin XC monster. Now, we can activate Pegasus, where we can banish this and then dump a turtle, which will actually be very helpful because it means this Sus and Uwu will now be immune to Imperm and Baylor. So we will go ahead, detach the Badger as its like temporary name, and then we can add Bujingi Owl. And this one is the inverse. You can discard it to target a face-up monster and negate its effects, and it's a quick effect if you control a Bujin XZ. But even though I kind of cheated and made 2 cards, what if Owl just said face-up card, or Badger said face-up card? You basically have an Omni Negate that can deal with anything that threatens the Sus and Uwu, which is kind of how this deck plays at this point. We've gotten so far past Yamato that you can just summon Susanoo on command whenever you want, which is just a better Yamato anyway. But even if you do want to do the old school Yamato control, you have like these two cards as like support. But basically, this actually gives you a point to even interact with Bujins at all, because the problem this archetype faces currently is that it has nothing it can do to establish itself. You can summon as many Susanoos as you want, because this deck can actually tear through its extra deck if it wanted to, but it doesn't matter, because there's nothing they can make that's worth doing. So even if you had the Rescue Rabbit plus Extender to go into Amaterasu and then get two Susanoo searches, it just won't matter, because you're not actually achieving anything. And this is kind of what I wanted to demonstrate. Basically, it's so obvious where you can see the holes in this deck, and that's kind of how they're designing support now. They're designing support that directly fixes the weakness of any deck, and then flying with it. And while that doesn't guarantee it's a meta deck, it gives a dedicated player base something to strive for, and those decks will occasionally just do well by a dedicated player. And I think this is their new idea for legacy support, but I'm going to show you one other demonstration to really hammer this home. Now, this next demonstration is probably crazier than the one you expected, because at least with Bujins, they have a lot of search and dump power, so it's reasonable that you could expect something like a hand trap negate or a graveyard negate to be something that they could directly benefit from. But this is one you might not have expected. Dark Lords are a deck that's really, really inconsistent. Anyone who, if you ask any Yu-Gi-Oh player what they think of Dark Lords, they're going to say it's a terrible deck with some of the nicest artwork in the game. And, I mean, to be fair, it's a pretty honest description. But what a lot of people don't realize is the reason they struggle so much is because at the start of this video, like I said, they literally just they're missing one card with a very normal effect from their arsenal. And I'm not joking. The weakness of Dark Lords is that they have all this search power, but not a single monster in the entire archetype can search a Dark Lord spell or trap. And because of that, you are first forced to turbo draw into these Dark Lord spells and traps, in which there are not that many of them. And more importantly, you need to see a specific Dark Lord spell or trap to even get your deck functional. That's how off base this is, and how ridiculous it is that this deck keeps getting search power, but it only searches monsters. But that wouldn't be an issue if there was a monster that searched spell or traps, but there isn't. So let me give you a very good demonstration of this. All we need for this combo is literally just Indulge Dark Lord. Now, I've written this spell or trap searcher specifically in a way to make this more of a one-card combo, but even if it was a two-card combo, the whole point would entirely come across. So, with Indulge Dark Lord, we're locked into only using fairy effects this turn, but we take two Dark Lords from our deck, and then we add one to our hand and special summon the other one to our opponent's field and defense. Now, this is on our opponent's field, and the reason I wrote this card in the way that it is just to demonstrate it's a one-card combo. But if this just said discard this and another Dark Lord card, it would be a two-card combo, but the entire same point would come across. So, I've written it that you can send it from your hand to the graveyard, and then one Dark Lord you own on either field, which would actually even mean the one you gave your opponent, to add a Dark Lord spell or trap. And then with that, we would add Banishment of the Dark Lords, and then we would add Dark Lord Contact. Contact would revive Superbia, which would then revive this new Dark Lord, which I'm just... placeholder name is Thanatos. And then we would pay 1,000 to copy the Banishment, and it would allow us to add Dark Lord Uprising. And then we would link these two Dark Lords away into the Condemned Dark Lord, which we will activate, toss the Uprising, and then add Dark Lord Morningstar. And then in the end phase, that 1,000 we paid gets immediately healed back by the Condemned Dark Lord. And now what's really funny about this, this is actually just in 4 summons, so this is a Nibiru-proof combo if you ever wanted to go for it. But what do you think this combo is? Well, I can tell you, your opponent starts playing and you notice, oh, they're going to start setting up a board soon. I'm going to pay 1,000, and I am going to fusion summon using the first Dark Lord Morningstar and then 2 Dark Fairy monsters to make the first Dark Lord. And because the Morningstar was used, their entire board gets blown up. And with 1 card, we have established an extremely difficult boss monster to deal with. And this is 1 card. What if instead I had more plays to go with? It would have been very simple. And what's really nice is Indulge doesn't have to be the only starter. It could also be the Rhoda spell that I searched earlier. But this is kind of... I guess this is like the ultimate demonstration of how, like, a lot of these archetypes that we say are bad, they're bad, but they're bad because they're, like, holding off on making them competent. Like, a lot of archetypes are not actually playable because they very specifically haven't given them the card to make them function properly. I'm going to be totally honest. They design their own cards. They know what they're doing. The reality is they're probably designing decks that are pretty mediocre until they decide, okay, let's get this. Let's try to get some people hyped about this deck. Like, this is an example. The Bujins were an example. There are plenty of examples. And then there are actual examples that have already happened, such as Meow Meow Mew and all the weather support. It's very, very simple. And it's the entire point I wanted to make with this video, is that a lot of the time, all the Legacy decks are just a card behind from being totally functional, and a dedicated player base could probably do well with it. But yep, that's about it. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I don't have anything else to say. I think I've proven my point across well enough. But yep, that's about it. Thank you all for watching, and remember, Master Dinner Flex will take your soul.